Hello everyone, Happy New Year and welcome back to the Deep Dive Project, or welcome if it's your first time here. Today we have fugitives from justice, we have predators and cassocks, and I will be introducing you to the world of the celebrity exorcist here in the United States. And that's just scratching the surface for what we are going to be getting into, so I'm so happy to have you here with me today. We will be looking at headlines from the month of December. These are headlines that I pulled that I felt were interesting, relevant to research that I have been doing or topics that I have been discussing here on the Deep Dive Project. And so without too much to do, let's go ahead and dive right in. Please like and subscribe and share this channel with someone if you have not already done so. So starting off right out the gate, we're going to be talking about the infamous Marcial Maciel. This article refers to him as the Catholic Predator, which I have to say is a title that is well earned. This was written by Miguel Lisbona Guillen, published December 30th, 2025 on the Spanish news site or Latin news site Chiapas Paralelo. And I've translated this from Spanish to English using a translation plugin on my browser. It does a pretty good job, but sometimes it can struggle with some of the proper nouns and things, so bear with me as we kind of make our way through all of this. As you know, if you've been here before, I'm not just looking at news articles from the United States or from the English-speaking world. I'm pulling from all around the globe, and so we're going to be reading some articles in a variety of languages today, and we'll just have to do our best with what we have, but I think the overall message is still going to come through. So we'll go ahead and start with this first one. This article is so interesting to me for a reason that is going to become very apparent within a couple of paragraphs here. So they start, Marcial Maciel, The Wolf of God is a 4-part documentary series available on HBO Max, which premiered in Mexico in August of this year. This format, which has become increasingly popular in recent years, allows viewers to follow controversial events and figures in a very short time and also sparks discussions about the validity of what is shown on screen. There is no doubt that many figures associated with the Catholic Church from the past to the present have become controversial due to their opinions and actions. They are seen as saints or demons, depending on the perspective from which they are analyzed, especially after their death. For this reason, they become excellent resources for documentary research. All true, I think, and very, very valid. I have done my own documentary research on the Legion of Christ and Marcial Maciel, and if you haven't seen that already, you can find it over on the Deep Dive Project. But they continue, and this is where I think this is just really, really interesting and maybe a sign of the times. I don't know, you tell me. They write, people like Jose Maria Escriva de Balaguer, founder of Opus Dei, or Marcial Maciel, precursor of another religious congregation, the Legionaries of Christ, are examples of figures who acquired immense power within the Catholic Church and whose influence in various spheres of public life extends far beyond their lifetimes. Their connections to politics and the economic world in several countries are evident, and the same can be said in such a fundamental area of our society as education. Now, what I think is so incredibly interesting about this is that everybody knows about Marcial Maciel, and if they don't know, they learn very, very quickly. You can't Google the name without immediately seeing the headlines and the fallout and the scandal and everything else. It's been well documented in the press. So I'm not surprised to see him discussed here, but what I think is so interesting, and also, I should say, I'm not surprised to see Opus Dei mentioned either, because it is an organization that has gained a reputation as being very influential and holding a lot of sway in some pretty significant sectors of society. So those two things on their own are not really surprising to me. What is significant to me here, and what I suspect may be a sign of the times, is the fact that a lauded and feted, or at least up until recent times, a lauded and feted organization like Opus Dei and a highly respected saint, no less, like Jose Maria Escriva, is being put in the same paragraph, having comparisons drawn in the same way as Marcial Maciel, who holds the distinction of being one of the most horrific predators in the Catholic Church. And his organization that he founded, which has a reputation for all kinds of stuff that I'm not going to get into right this second. Again, like I said, I've already done all the research on that. You can go and find that in your own time. It's interesting to me because everybody knows that the Legionaries of Christ had a massive fall from grace. If you're in Catholic circles, or if you follow Catholic news, or if you're in this world in any way, shape, or form, you know about the Legionaries of Christ fall from grace, how huge of an organization it was before the crimes of its founder and other members became public knowledge, as well as how highly respected Marcial Maciel was. Had this huge fall from grace. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that. And of course, on a certain level, it seems like everybody has heard of Opus Dei too, whether it's because of recent news headlines, if you're following human rights news around the world, or if it's just because of that damn book that we cannot get away from, the Da Vinci Code, because of the liberties that the author took with Silas the albino monk, saying that he was a member of Opus Dei, yada, 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 you know. Opus Dei has been seen as such a respectable thing, right? Like, you can't criticize Opus Dei because that's tantamount to criticizing the Catholic Church, blah, blah, blah. And yet, in this article right here, the comparisons are being drawn. Jose Maria Escrivá to someone like Marcial Maciel. Opus Dei to something like the Legionaries of Christ. I think that's interesting because I think 15 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, I think you would have been hard-pressed to find an article like this. And again, I don't know how mainstream Chiapas Paralelo I don't know how mainstream this site is in terms of like Latin news and that kind of thing. Maybe this didn't get in front of very many people's eyes, and so maybe saying something like this isn't really like the risky move that I am perceiving it as here, or would have perceived it as in times past. You know, someone speaking out against Opus Dei in this way in the not too distant past would have been really, really, really significant. People would not have been able to stop talking about it. But the record is beginning to show that Opus Dei is not nearly as worthy as it would like everyone to believe. Its history is not nearly as spotless as it has made it out to be. And the hagiographies about Jose Maria Escrivá, the founder, have left out a lot of pretty pertinent information. This is discussed often within the circles that have created what it amounts now to a trail of victims, right? Survivors who allege really horrible experiences, really oppressive behaviors, abuses of a wide range. I think if you step back and you look at the whole thing in context, it's not perhaps so shocking that someone would draw these kinds of comparisons now. But I think it's, like I said, a sign of the times, because in not too distant a past, this type of thing, no one would say this type of thing, because nobody would dream of implying that Opus Dei is in any way, shape, or form on the same trajectory to downfall that the Legionaries of Christ ended up on, or that its founder, who has been declared a saint by the Catholic Church, could be compared to the antithesis of all that is saintly in Marcial Maciel. Let me know what you think. I read a lot. I'm constantly reading. So maybe I'm just like a little bit too close to all of this stuff to really see the forest for the trees. And maybe I am making mountains out of molehills, to use a euphemism from my childhood. But maybe, like I'm saying, this is a sign of the times. This is a sign of a turning tide. This is a sign of a change in perception about an organization like Opus Dei. Time will tell, but I wanted to draw your attention to that. I'm not going to continue to read this article just because, like I said, all of the stuff about the Legionaries of Christ has already, I've talked at length about it, and the same for Opus Dei as well, and we will be doing that in this video today. So if you want to read the rest of this article or any of the other articles that I'm going over today, you can find them linked in a source document down below. Feel free to go through that and have your way with those headlines. But moving right along, so this is news from Rio de Janeiro, very kind of a small region to zoom in on, but I think it's just interesting to take a beat and touch down and see what's happening in some of these other countries. And the reason why this one caught my eye is because of an individual who's mentioned more so than any organization or anything like that. Again, this is something I just kind of want to draw your attention to. I'm not going to be reading the entire thing. The headline says Basiar's, and I could be mispronouncing that, and I'm very sorry, I mean no disrespect, arrest opens opportunities for new names in Rio's politics. This was published on Diario Nacional by editorial staff on December 6th. So there was this arrest of Rodrigo Basiar, president of the Legislative Assembly of Rio de Janeiro, and it's having a strong impact, or was, on the state's political scene. This individual who was arrested, who was in the spotlight, was accused of leaking information about an operation that resulted in the arrest of State Deputy T.H. Hoyas, thus leaving a vacuum that could be filled by new names in the 2026 election. The situation highlights an opportunity for candidates considered outsiders, such as Italo Marsili, Rafael Luz, and Rodrigo Pimentel, who stand out for their active communication on social media and a discourse focused on combating crime. So the name that jumped out at me here, and probably does for anyone who is a longtime listener of these newsroom analyses, Italo Marsili. This is an individual who I have drawn your attention to in the past. He is a Brazilian businessman, pseudo-intellectual. In my opinion, based on what the research that I have done, he's kind of a mishmash of like Matt Walsh and Jordan Peterson, and maybe a little bit of like Andrew Tate, just a dash, you know, just a little bit. That's kind of my perception of him. And he has become popular because he's written a bunch of different books about kind of like self-help type stuff. He also has these like courses and stuff that he's created that you can take. And he's interested in getting involved in politics, and is someone who I've seen pop up off and on over the last year or so in discussions about politics. But it's important not to overstate his importance. He's interested in getting involved in government, clearly, and winning elections, and he's very much in the political sphere. But he doesn't have a huge presence. So, and they say that here, presented as a promising new candidate, Marsili has already been considered by parties such as Novo, and more recently has had talks with parties like Republicanos and PSD. However, polls show that he is still far behind established candidates, with only 2% of voting intentions, while the current mayor, Eduardo Paes leads with 35%, and Basiar, despite his legal complications, still has 9% of voting intentions. So he's got a very small percentage, 2% of the voting block, as it were. But, you know, he's somebody who is throwing his name out there. He's consistently coming up in these conversations. Sure, he doesn't have a huge percentage of the population support now, but how many people, if we're just looking at like American government, for example, the federal government, the office of the president, for example, how many people have attained the position of president, been elected as a president of the United States by virtue of this very long game that they played that stretched out over decades upon decades upon decades, all with the intention of one day maybe putting themselves into the position where they could conceivably do something like run for president of the United States and win. There are plenty of examples of past presidents who have done this kind of thing. It's not uncommon. But the guy in office right now, Donald Trump, is a perfect example. I mean, he was talking, if you go back and you look, he was talking about running for president back in like the 80s, maybe even the 70s. And his father, Fred, has a long history in the United States political arena. None of this stuff happens by accident. The people who end up in positions of power are there, I think, because they played the long game, they had the right connections, they knew the right things or the right people, and they were willing to get down and dirty maybe in a way that like their opposition wasn't. There's a lot of things that go into it, sure, but I think just being willing to stick around long after everybody else has fallen off, died, gotten disinterested, decided to turn their attention to other things. That can be the lion's share of the work half of the time. And so just because someone like Italo Marsili, who also, by the way, is an Opus Dei supernumerary with a large family and wife and all that, even though he only has 2% now, he's not that old. You know, he's in his, if I had to guess, I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but, you know, based on how he appears and everything, I'm going to guess he's in his, like, mid-40s or so. He's got time. I mean, we got people in public office that are, like, in the old folks' home in this country over here. So he's got time. He's got time to turn that 2% into something a little bit more significant. So anyway, I wanted to draw your attention to that. I like to keep an eye on people like this. He was somebody who was brought to my attention a couple of years ago, and I've just kind of been keeping an eye on what he's doing ever since, because I think it's interesting. I think that he is someone who is trying to follow a playbook that he thinks has worked for other significant political figures. You know, people like Jordan Peterson or any of these other talking heads, or even people who have wormed their way into governance. And I'm going to start, this is a sidebar, but as I'm moving on here, I'm not going to read any more of this. I just wanted to talk about that little piece right there about Marsili. But I meant to do this today, and I forgot. I want to start from going forward. Every single one of these newsroom analyses, I want to start it by reading you the definition of a word, because I think it's an important word to understand, and I think that it means something different than what people think it means or what people attribute it to. You know, we're talking a lot about politics, and we're talking about governance, and I have noticed that people seem to be, or have been for quite some time, combining the two. When in fact, you know, the fact that politics exist in any sector, whether it's government or economics or education or any industry or whatever, is sort of a byproduct of the fact that you have people with massive egos involved, less than it is just the way that it is. And I'll think this will make a little bit more sense if I read you the definition of politics. So there's two main definitions here, and this is what I got. I just Googled definition of politics, and this is what it gave me. So if you don't like this definition, argue with your mom and don't argue with me. 1, the activities associated with the governance of a country or other area, especially the debate or conflict among individuals or parties having or hoping to achieve power. Okay? Debate or conflict among individuals or parties having or hoping to achieve power. Not having or hoping to achieve liberty, not having or hoping to achieve freedom, not having or hoping to bring about equality for all. No, power. Hoping or having power. That's what it's about. And or activities within an organization that are aimed at improving someone's status or position and are typically considered to be devious or divisive. Not activities that uplift and unite people, not activities that motivate people to work together for the common good. No, activities that are typically considered to be devious or divisive. Now, you may be able to argue with me, well, sure, that's politics gone bad, but there's an ethical way to do politics, and it doesn't have to be like that. Okay, that's fine. You go do that over there away from me. Because I don't want this type of stuff in my life or in my country or in the governance of the people representing me. I don't want it. I don't think that it should be there. I think the fact that it is unfortunate. But people treat it as this foregone conclusion, and I think that that's a mistake. So one more time for the people in the back. The definition of politics are 1, activities associated with the governance of a country or other area, especially the debate or conflict among individuals or parties having or hoping to achieve power. Or 2, activities within an organization that are aimed at improving someone's status or position and are typically considered to be devious or divisive. We're talking about people like Italo Marcilli wanting to be political, wanting to be devious and divisive then, wanting to stoke conflict then, wanting to have and maintain power. And that goes for all of these other people that we're going to be talking about today, including this one right here, this guy. So this is from Prensa Latina. This was published December 10th. Candidate banned from using religion in election campaign in Peru. The special electoral jury of first instance has imposed a restriction on the candidate after verifying that during a proselytizing rally, he appealed to religious invocations that violate the rules of electoral propaganda. The measure can be appealed by the candidate from the Popular Renewal Party to a higher court, but in the meantime, he must not use religious references. This is about Lopez Aliaga, and he called at a rally, quote, "Brothers of the same Heavenly Father," and held up a picture of the Lord of Miracles, venerated by Catholics, thereby violating fundamental principles of the electoral process and breaking the election regulations according to the court. The sanction aims to preserve neutrality in the electoral process and protect the freedom of discernment of voters, and includes a warning of additional sanctions if the candidate, linked to the ultra-conservative congregation Opus Dei, reoffends. So this guy was the mayor of Peru, but in the interest of furthering his electoral campaign, furthering his political ascension, as it were, he stepped down and has turned all of his energy towards running for this public office. But now he's been sanctioned because he couldn't keep his ideology out of it. He couldn't go without making some appeal to divine authority. And there's a time and a place for those kinds of things. I'm not saying that he shouldn't be allowed to believe those things or that he shouldn't be able to profess them, because I think both of those things are true. I believe in freedom of religion for all people. But I also believe in freedom from religion, which means that you can't go around imposing your belief system on the entire world as you see it and demanding that everyone else get into your lane with you and to see everything from your point of view. That I do not support. And so I think that this is a really, really good thing on this special electoral jury of first instance. I think that it's a good thing that they imposed this sanction, because we've seen the whole concept of the separation of church and state coming under increasing fire over the last decade, maybe, and longer than that, of course. I mean, there are seeds that were planted before I was born, before my parents were born, even if we're being totally honest. So it kind of is, it is what it is, but it's happening, and I don't think that it's okay, and I think it's important to hold the line and to hold the standard. You cannot be running for a public office to be the leader of a country and be demanding that people adhere to your religious convictions. You just can't, because not everyone in your country, even a predominantly Catholic country like Peru, not everyone is going to be on the same page as you. And even within the people who might share your religious conviction, there's going to be quite a bit of disparity. And we know, let's not forget here, we know that Aliaga is closely connected to Opus Dei, which has a very, very specific flavor and type of Catholic governance that it envisions for the world. And it's not a very understanding or flexible one, in my view. So with the separation of church and state being something that is continually coming under attack, every little bit counts, and I thought this was a good move, and I wanted to highlight it. And I also just wanted to call your attention once again to this guy right here, who's going to continue to come up on this channel. I just know it. I can feel it in my bones. You know, when somebody has become like, you've unlocked a new character. Basically, this is the new character, and I think he's going to be here to stay for a while, unless he suffers massive coronary heart failure or something, which I wouldn't wish on nobody, but stressful job, and he's not the picture of health in my opinion, so we'll see how that goes. All right, moving right along. This is really, really interesting, and kind of like blew my mind a little bit when I read it. So this is about Juanito AI. That is something that the Legionaries of Christ cooked up. So this is from Exaudi News, very pro Legion of Christ, and in like even I think Opus Dei publication, Catholic publication. This is like huge font. If I switch to reader view, is it better? Yeah. So this was published by Exaudi staff on, what was the date on here? December 12th. Juanito AI takes a bold leap from Guadalupan AI to platform for Catholic formation. It says an evolution that builds bridges between living tradition, digital evangelization, and apostolic outreach. One of the greatest strengths of this version is its educational value. Aware that authentic communication requires a real encounter between two people and that technology should not replace presence, but rather enhance and complement it, which, you know, good that they say that here, but just wait. Juanito is especially aimed at religion teachers, catechists, and pastoral agents so that they may have in him, a support that allows them to do all of these different things, prepare classes, present complex concepts, design pastoral materials, training activities, blah, 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 blah. All of these different things. But they say it's not just a database. They want it to be this Catholic educational assistant capable of transforming doctrinal study into vibrant learning experiences. So on the face of it, I don't have a problem with this, really. I have a problem with the fact that it's an AI, and I think it's interesting. Let me read this right here, where it gets into some of the background on this. It says, thousands of faithful use Juanito AI as a formative and spiritual guide, especially pilgrims visiting the Basilica of Guadalupe at Tepeyac, but the project originated in the rural communities of Mexico's highest peak, Pico de Orizaba, within the Mas Alto mission of the Legionaries of Christ. There, on the Camino de Guadalupe, the desire arose to offer a tool that combined Guadalupan culture, spiritual depth, solid formation, and evangelizing commitment. Okay, so this is where my brain started to like glitch out just a little bit. Whether you like AI or hate AI, whether or not you use AI or you're like me and you prefer not to use it and implement it in your life, it is a fact that the technology is incredibly costly. From an environmental energy perspective, it is incredibly costly. The amount of water that it takes to cool and maintain the data centers that house the stuff for these AIs is significant. It surpasses every other water usage metric that we have, more than beef, more than cotton, more than any other like transportation, more than anything. It is so environmentally costly. And we really don't, I hate to be the one to have to tell you this, but we really do not have the capacity, the energetic capacity, the technology, whatever, to be able to support the kind of large scale AI-ification that is being unleashed upon all corners of society, all corners of the world right now. And, you know, admittedly, I don't know a lot about this region, Pico de Orizaba, within the Mas Alto mission of the Legionaries of Christ, but, you know, I don't know a lot about the economy there. I don't know anything about the geopolitics there. I don't know a whole lot. I'm just going off of what I'm reading here, but they say that let's see, it's a rural community of Mexico's highest peak. So these people are far out. They probably have limited technology. They probably have limited infrastructure. They probably have limited everything. And it would probably be a fantastic boon to this community for there to be some way for them to share Guadalupan culture and spiritual depth and the solid formation and even the evangelizing side of it. You know, it's your right to go and talk to people about your religion if you want to. It's their right not to listen. But like, sure, that's okay. But the way that they are deciding to go about it is by developing an artificial intelligence that's going to convey and combine Guadalupan culture with spiritual depth. Artificial intelligence. Are you kidding me? Its creator, Father Evaristo Sada, LC, expresses it this way: Juanito AI not only informs, it forms. Its mission is to accompany the spiritual and apostolic growth of each person. So, unless you live under a rock, I am sure that you have seen the news headlines and the discussions about ChatGPT and what it has done to people's brains, people who have started to treat it like a therapist, a friend, a lover, the psychosis that it's inducing people. And it's said right here in the black and white and red all over. Juanito AI not only informs, it's not just a tool to access information. It's not just like Google or something like that. It's not Christian Bing. It's there to form. It's there to provide the version of Catholicism that its creators believe that people should be following. Not in a way that provides information so that people can discern what they believe for themselves, but in a way that molds the user into what the designers want them to be. That's how I read this. The tool is capable of shedding light on issues that arise in everyday life. Discernment in the face of difficult decisions, family and work life, the experience of charity and social justice, the support of adolescents and young people, the understanding of the liturgical year and its celebrations. This just seems so unnecessary to me. Maybe this is really going to set the Pico de Orizaba community up for life. Maybe this is going to really put them on the map. Bring in all kinds of resources, ecotourism, increased visitation to the Basilica of Guadalupe at Tepeyac. Maybe. Or maybe it's going to become just another crutch for people who are already struggling with executive function, struggling to make decisions in everyday life. And it does not create any type of resilience or improvement or anything in a person for them to just say, I'm in this really tough situation. Let me just go talk to my AI chatbot real quick and see what they have to say about it. This is a really tough situation. I feel really uncomfortable. I'm being presented with information that I don't like. Let me go talk to Juanito AI and see how I should respond to this and what I should tell this person so that they get off my back and stop presenting me with uncomfortable information that I don't like. And again, I go back to the ChatGPT mental it's making people lose their minds and lose touch with reality completely and totally. It's not a joke. People have died. ChatGPT has groomed people into taking their own lives. Children, it's assisted adults in completely wrecking and destroying their lives, their personal relationships. But I guess we're meant to believe that Juanito AI and the Mass Alto mission of the Legionaries of Christ are going to be able to do it right. They're going to be able to do what the best and brightest that money can buy in today's technological world we're not able to do. That's a bold move, Cotton. Anything to streamline the deliverance of convenient slop down people's throats. Whether it's slop from the entertainment establishment, whether it's slop from the political, governmental establishment, slop from the religious. It's just whatever we can do to streamline it, to remove any possible snags that you might get hung up on that might make you think twice, that might make you take a second look. Anything we can do to create confidence that this is your number one source of information, you can count on it. You can use it for making tough decisions and shedding light on issues that arise in everyday life. Discernment in the face of difficult decisions. Family and work life. That's right. Juanito AI is going to help you work through your family and work issues. Sure, Jan. All right, moving on. What you need to know about Cast, the far-right candidate who made it to the runoff in Chile. This is from Diario Red. This was published the 13th of December, written by Valeria Silva Guzman. The 59-year-old lawyer, son of a German with ties to Nazism, has a long history. His career is a thread connecting the dictatorial past with the far-right present. This is pretty interesting. Chile today is a polarized country. Debates surrounding security and migration dominate the electoral climate of the second round in the South Pacific. The most nationalist and conservative response emerged from Jose Antonio Cast. At 59, this leader of the Republican Party and standard bearer of the far right has reached the presidential runoff for the second time. In the first round of voting on November 16, 2025, he came in second place with approximately 24% of the vote behind leftist candidates Jeanette Jara. Cast is also seeking revenge after his defeat to Gabriel Boric in 2021. The lawyer, son of a German with ties to Nazism, has a long history. His trajectory is a thread connecting the dictatorial past with the far-right present in the southern part of the continent. Furthermore, his close ties to the presidential palace, La Moneda, speak to a Chile unwilling to reclaim its historical memory. Cast makes no secret of his admiration for the Pinochet era. Unlike figures such as Sebastián Piñera, who always maintained a certain distance to avoid being directly associated with the horrors of the 1970s, he distanced himself early on from the right-wing sectors that negotiated with or collaborated with the Concertación governments. In an interview with ADN Chile, he stated it clearly, Piñera's ideas were ours, but very, very watered down. For Cast, there is no room for half measures. Raised in a conservative Catholic environment with ties to Opus Dei. When did you think it was going to hit? Were you wondering why I was reading this article and where it was going? I always wonder, like, are listeners sitting there wondering, okay, when is this going to start? Why is she reading this to us? I always wonder. Or if you can pretty much, do you just go into it assuming? You'll have to let me know. I'm curious. For me, it's always kind of fun reading these back too, because it's like, all right, there's the first and third paragraph, fourth paragraph. When's it going to start? When is it going to hit? When's the reason going to kick in? Well, here it is. So he was raised in a conservative Catholic environment with ties to Opus Dei, and his positions are uncompromising. He categorically rejects any progress on rights such as abortion or same-sex marriage. On issues of migration and security, his discourse veers toward nationalism with xenophobic undertones. He has even proposed building walls along the borders inspired by models like that of the United States. And the consequences of the candidate's approach have already changed hundreds of lives. In the final weeks before the election, caravans of Latin American migrants left the country northward, frightened by his promises to criminalize migration. Cast's story begins in a large German family that arrived in Chile in the 1950s. His father was a member and soldier of the Nazi National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP. Even more seriously, he has been implicated in the Paine massacre during the dictatorship, where dozens of farmers were murdered. His older brother, Miguel Cast, held key positions such as Minister of Labor and President of the Central Bank under Pinochet. So this is a man that comes from a family that has close ties to a very, very bloody period in Chile's history. And it really wasn't all that long ago. During the 2021 campaign, real documents surfaced detailing his father's association with the Nazi regime. This family history is not a mere anecdote. It weighs heavily on his public image. What the left initially saw as a way to discredit Cast may now be one of his greatest assets in securing right-wing votes. So in the 1980s, he was studying law at the Catholic University and joined the University Guild, a Catholic movement linked to Opus Dei and the Pinochet regime. He was a prominent figure in the Yes campaign in 1988, defending the continuation of the dictatorship. He was 30 in 1996, and he became a councilman for the UDI party in Buin. From there, he moved to the Chamber of Deputies in 2002, serving 3 terms until 2014, where he championed conservative agendas, opposing abortion, same-sex marriage, sex education, and contraception. He led the UDI caucus on several occasions, but failed in his bids to become party president in 2008 and 2010. In 2016, he finally resigned from the party following internal conflicts. His first presidential bid in 2017 as an independent was a flop. He didn't even reach 8% of the vote. But remember what I said, these guys are not above failing, trying and failing, and they will try again later. 2 years later, in fact, in 2019, he founded the Republican Party with other far-right figures. After the social unrest erupted in 2021, he won the first round of the presidential election but lost in the runoff to Boric. The final blow to his leadership came in 2023 when his party swept the constitutional election with over 35% of the vote, solidifying his position as the undisputed leader of the hard right. In this 2025 election, Cass did not lead in the first round as he did in 2021, but instead entered the runoff in second place against Jeanette Hara, the representative of the left-wing government. He started with fewer votes, but polls favor him in the second round. His polarizing rhetoric, full of promises of hardline approach, deeply divides Chile. This is the first time in many years that Chileans are required to vote. According to several analysts, this requirement is a boon for Cass, who appears to be the favorite among the more politically disengaged segments of the population. Segments that would not go to the polls were it not for the penalties imposed on those who abstain. Cass is a candidate of the traditional right, but he also seems to be establishing himself as an anti-establishment candidate. Cass has made overtures to Milei's Argentina. Milei has connections to Opus Dei as well, and Bukele's El Salvador. He recognizes Milei so much that it was one of his first communications after the first round of voting, and he considers Bukele, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, kind of don't care, a top international leader, and as he stated after his trip to El Salvador, his role model on security issues. A key part of his campaign promise is to move Chile away from the progressive and left-wing axis in which Gabriel Boric has operated. For some analysts, Cass is already a virtual president-elect based on the polls. Others, more meticulous, are still waiting for the final percentage he might achieve to gauge the potential strength of a government inherited from the dictatorships of the 1970s. But there are also those who maintain that the polls are likely to make another mistake and bear no resemblance to Sunday's results. So, stay tuned, but yet another Opus Dei figure with significant ties to a pretty violent period of Chile's history that also had Opus Dei hovering in the wings. It's pretty interesting. So I wanted to make a point to bring that to your attention. All right, so this is kind of interesting, and this came up because of Cast, who we were just talking about. I was doing some additional research, and this came up because I type keywords to find articles, and so if an article has one of those keywords like Opus Dei, for example, then I'll end up seeing it, and here it's mentioned. And the headline for this article is, "What is Schoenstatt, the ultra-Catholic movement to which Chile's president-elect Jose Antonio Cast belongs, and what is its presence in Latin America?" And there's a picture here, and under the picture it says, "The group, like Opus Dei, the Legionaries of Christ, is made up of both religious and lay people." So this was published December 18th by Juan Francisco Alonso on BBC News Mundo. It says, "Jose Antonio Cast, the president-elect of Chile, is a man of deep religious convictions. He made this clear in his first speech as soon as the results of Sunday's election were known, when he stated, 'Nothing is possible if we did not have God. Nothing happens in life for those of us who are of faith that is not in direct relation to God.' And then he asked his Creator to humbly grant him the wisdom, temperance, and strength to always rise to the challenge he will assume on March 11th when he takes over from Gabriel Boric at the La Moneda Palace." So he's moving in. These were 3 of the 5 religiously charged phrases that the 59-year-old lawyer uttered during the almost hour he spoke to the thousands of his followers who gathered in Santiago to celebrate his victory in the presidential elections. However, this shouldn't be surprising. The politician and several of his siblings were raised under the Schoenstatt movement, a conservative Catholic movement with a presence in over 100 countries, including all of Latin America. Let's see, where does it say? I'm looking for more information about Schoenstatt specifically. So it says, it's an apostolic movement of renewal born within the church with a marked Marian character according to its website. The formation of a new man in a new community that serves the church and society is the objective of the organization. Father Felipe Rios, coordinator of the movement in America, explained to BBC Mundo. So Schoenstatt was founded in October 1914, a few months after the outbreak of World War I, by the German priest Joseph Kentenich. He passed away in 1968. Its name comes from a village located in the Vallendar area on the banks of the Rhine. Well, it might be Vallendar then if it's German. On the banks of the Rhine River, which is in Germany, in the current state of Rhineland-Palatinate in western Germany and near the borders with Luxembourg and Belgium. Interesting. Kettenich, who was a member of the Society of the Catholic Apostolate, better known as the Palatine Fathers, was a professor at a seminary that the order had in the town of Schoenstatt, a German word that can be literally translated as beautiful place. The priest, along with a group of students, restored a small chapel located in the seminary gardens and asked the Virgin Mary to turn it into a place of pilgrimage. In regard to what this organization is now, it says the organization is an organization within the Catholic Church that was born with the idea that lay people could perform tasks similar to those of religious orders, but with autonomy from ecclesial hierarchies. Wow, that sounds familiar. It's almost like Escriva took a page from their book. Which, I mean, he took pages from a lot of people's books, I think, to hodgepodge this whole thing together. Here they're talking to the similarities and differences with Opus Dei. So I am not the first person to say, that sounds familiar. The Italian historian Alexandra von Tuffenbach, in addition to confirming that the group is made up of several branches, pointed out that some of them are secular institutes, that is, organizations whose members, without being religious, commit to living in poverty, chastity, and obedience while remaining in their usual social and professional environment. Comparing Schoenstatt to Opus Dei is accurate, the researcher told BBC Mundo, when other Catholic groups that could be considered comparable are mentioned. However, Ramis warned that there are significant differences between Schoenstatt and the organization founded by the Spaniard Jose Maria Escrivá de Balaguer. Although there are similarities, Schoenstatt has not attempted to influence politics. In contrast, during the Franco regime in Spain, Opus Dei took advantage of the situation to place its members in key positions in the economy and banking, the so-called technocrats, the Chilean academic pointed out. And this is so funny. It's interesting that they're saying that there, because this is something that has been like disputed by people occasionally, although maybe not so much anymore because I feel like it's becoming more common knowledge, but like the idea that yes, Opus Dei is well aware of where its members are, particularly the influential ones, the ones who are in positions to be particularly influential in government or education or entertainment or whatever. They know, and to say that people are not being motivated at times to behave in certain ways or to organize in certain ways would just be false based on testimonies from people who allege having firsthand experience with Opus Dei. So that's funny. It says, until Cast's election, only one other member of this Catholic movement had held a high office in Chile, his older brother Miguel. Yeah, and remember in that previous article it said that he was in the president of Central Bank during the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet. And it's a group that prioritizes family life over public life, and although it shares with Opus Dei sexual and moral rigor, it does not have such a guilt-inducing tone. It does not resort to penances such as flagellation or wearing a hair shirt, as is denounced in Opus Dei. It has a strong presence among wealthy classes, although not also in middle, professional, and business sectors. It is not progressive, but rather quite conservative, but in some elements, a greater ideological pluralism is seen than in other church organizations. The labels of ultra-Catholic or ultra-conservative that are given to Schoenstatt by some sectors of society and the press do not keep Rios up at night. I mean, okay, that's fine. Your opinion has been made on what you believe Schoenstatt to be, so why would you care if people don't agree with your point of view? That would be like me saying that I was like disturbed by the fact that people keep wanting to blame everything on Opus Dei instead of seeing the forest for the trees, but I'm pretty firm in my convictions, so what other people think, they can have theirs. So I just think that's a funny thing to say. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. I'm not going to read the rest of the article, mainly just because I thought that was the parallels here, differences and similarities with Opus Dei. I wanted to point that out. And I wanted to bring your attention to yet another conservative Catholic organization, this Schoenstatt. And maybe at some point I need to do some deep dive research into this, although maybe because it allegedly, according to this Chilean academic, allegedly does not have all of the same problems that Opus Dei has, then there might be absolutely no reason to talk about it. You know, I'm not really interested in putting organizations that aren't doing anything wrong and people who are just trying to live out their faith peacefully on blast. I have nothing to gain by doing that. I don't want to do that. That's not why I'm here. But if I find out that they are, you know, abusing human rights in some way, shape, or form, then Katie bar the door, I'll be there. All right, this is the one that I was really looking forward to sharing with you guys. This is some fun and new info for me to be bringing to you guys, and just put a little pin in this topic because you will be seeing this. This will be a return topic on the Deep Dive Project in the coming year. So this is an article that was published on wherepeteris.com, which is a website that's run by Mike Lewis. I have referred to his work in the past. He's a very busy writer. He writes a lot, and I've found numerous articles that have tied into things that I've been researching in the past. So I've been on his site before, and it's a pretty interesting one. If you're interested in reading up on topics like this, then it's a good place to go. And there's some interesting stuff here, but we're just going to start with this one article here because it's a perfect opportunity for me to tell you about someone that I'm going to be talking about more in the future. So this is a commentary piece published December 16th, 2025, Father Ripperger's Bizarre and Dangerous Views on Women, Part 1. Celebrity exorcist Father Chad Ripperger has become a prominent and authoritative voice in certain Catholic media circles, captivating large in-person and online audiences with his opinions on topics ranging from demonology to space aliens to Harry Potter. Let me know if you were raised cradle Catholic, if you were allowed to read Harry Potter growing up, because I remember that being like one of the hottest debates in the Catholic parental circles that my parents were in when I was growing up. And I was definitely not allowed to read Harry Potter on account of its, you know, demonic nature and everything. Anyway, he is something of a religious guru to many of his followers, perhaps a Chuck Norris or Bruce Lee of traditional Catholicism, and an expert in spiritual warfare and theology. On the surface, he plays the part well. He presents himself with a tone of erudition and always has a ready response to any question posed to him, never missing a beat. He presents himself as a defender of tradition in an age of moral and cultural confusion, and his reputation as an exorcist lends his claims about sin, demons, curses, and deliverance an aura of credibility, which appeals to Catholics unsettled by world events and the state of contemporary culture. Well, all I can tell you is if you are a fan, do not sit down and start comparing notes on things that he has said, because the man is full of holes. But anyway, confidence is not fidelity, nor is it competence, and a clerical collar does not place a priest's public teaching beyond scrutiny. Thank you for saying that, Mike Lewis. I agree. Ripperger is currently promoting a documentary starring himself along with Timothy Gordon, What a Woman Is. Oh, God. Hosted on political pundit and Catholic convert Candace Owens' website. Of course. In the film's trailer and across multiple appearances on social media to discuss the film, including an appearance during production on Gordon's YouTube channel on January 2025 and another episode last week to celebrate the film's release, Ripperger offers a view of women and a framework for marriage that goes well beyond a sharp critique of modern feminism or the promotion of Christian married life. Ripperger's vision is strict authoritarianism, in which wives are bound to obey their husbands in everything but sin. His views are built on a suspicious anthropology of women, rigid theory of male dominance, and a spiritual warfare narrative that treats disagreement as a symptom of disorder, sometimes psychological, sometimes diabolical. Oh, and by the way, if you are struggling psychologically, he will not help you. But he will be happy to take your money and tell you that he's helping you. Allegedly. Like many of Ripperger's ideas, it is difficult to place his worldview in the Catholic tradition beyond a few carefully mined quotes. What's different about his views on women in marriage is that, unlike his beliefs on young earth creationism, generational spirits and curses, and Harry Potter, his understanding of patriarchy doesn't really map onto any fundamentalist Protestant models either. And it really, really doesn't at all. If you look him up and you do some like reading around on his various websites and things, you will at some point stumble across a diagram that is kind of reminiscent of the diagram that the IBLP cult that the Duggars were a part of. You would see it used in their like literature and stuff. I've seen YouTubers flash it up, which is why I know what it looks like. I was never a part of the IBLP or anything like that. But it's like the 3 or 4 different tiers of umbrellas, and like the biggest tier is God, and then the second under that is the husband, and then under that it's the wife, and then under that, like, it's like this very tiered system of like rights. Basically, you will find something that's way more like complex, but essentially the same thing if you do enough reading about Ripperger and look around online. Protestant fundamentalist models of patriarchy, such as Quiverful or the Promise Keepers movement, promoted by figures such as Bill Gothard and Doug Phillips, do emphasize male headship and wifely submission, but they at least attempt to cloak these demands in the language of male responsibility, sacrificial leadership, and slogans like women and children first. The worldview advanced by Ripperger and Gordon, however, lacks even this minimal rhetorical softening. Little is said about the husband's concrete moral duties, while considerable attention is paid to policing female resistance, warning against domination, and enforcing obedience as a matter of order rather than charity. What could go wrong? What emerges is a stark framework in which hierarchy functions less as a sacrifice for men and more as a disciplinary expectation imposed on women. What else is new? In the Gordon-Ripperger model, husbands must hold a standing right to final decision authority. Ripperger repeatedly claims that women's resistance to male authority is rooted in the curse of Eve, and says that demons exploit women to undermine men. In their banter, there are no warnings about men taking this authority too far or admonitions that husbands must sacrifice or lay down their lives for their wives. Instead, he hands would-be abusers a religious vocabulary for domination. This has the potential to train frightened Catholic women to confuse obedience with safety and to interpret abusive behavior from husbands as the result of their failure to obey. There's no has the potential to here. It's happening. It's real. It's happening. There are already frightened Catholic women who have confused obedience to their idiotic husbands with safety, that they have to do that. And that the abusive behavior that they are suffering from these pieces of shit are deserved and are a result of their failure. It's already happening. I grew up seeing it. It's already happening, Mike. It's already here. And Ripperger, for his part, is just the latest manifestation of these really repressive and harmful ideas, which are not new. None of this is new. In my past articles about Father Ripperger's troubling ideas, I did not respond directly to his views on women because I believed they deserved their own article. In the course of researching for this series, I realized that it will need more than one article. Ripperger does not treat feminism as one problem among many. He treats it as the decisive obstacle to moral and social stability. In the January video, he says, "This country will never get its footing and get solidified morally, spiritually, but even societally until feminism is properly addressed. There's no other way to do it." The definition of feminism used by Gordon and Ripperger is extraordinarily broad. At one point in the January video, Ripperger asserts, quote, "In fact, I find most trad women are just crypto-feminists, ultimately." Oh my gosh, this guy. Gordon immediately concurs, "Me too. We have talked about it. You said like 80%, and I was like, Father, it's like 95. Ripperger responds without hesitation, "Yeah, I was being generous. I was being generous." I'm sorry, I can't help it. I gotta do something to get through this or I'm gonna freaking lose it. My tolerance is pretty much gone for this guy and for the people that he associates with because I already know it all. I already know it all. But all in due time, my friends, all in due time, you will learn. What this exchange reveals is not rhetorical excess, but ideological scope. In their framework, feminism is not confined to explicit political advocacy or doctrinal dissent. It encompasses Catholics who embrace traditional aesthetics, traditional family structures, and even self-identified traditionalists, as long as women retain meaningful agency, judgment, or resistance within marriage. For Ripperger and Gordon, feminism becomes less a coherent ideology than a catch-all term for insufficient submission. According to Ripperger and Gordon, even the vast majority of today's tradwives aren't traditional enough, of course. The no true Scotsmen, you're never pure enough. You're never good enough. You're never sinless enough. You're never blameless enough. There are no perfect victims. In a Sensus Fidelium podcast interview last week, Ripperger made this logic explicit. He claimed that when a wife works outside the home and starts providing for herself and also providing for the family, it produces a kind of feminizing effect on men that takes a chink out of his armor. Oh my gosh. Men are not that fragile. I promise you. I promise you. And if they are, feeding into those fragilities is not going to be the solution. I can promise you that. A wife having an economic agency is not framed as a prudential arrangement, a shared discernment, or a response to concrete family needs, but as a spiritual and psychological threat to male identity and household order. Ripperger then raises the stakes. Feminism, in his telling, is not a complex modern phenomenon with differing approaches or a diverse movement with varied strengths and shortcomings. It is a replay of Genesis itself, directed by the evil one, all capitalized. In the same podcast, Ripperger asserts that Satan goes after Eve to undo Adam, and that the way Satan's going to destroy the family is by subverting the proper order within the context of the family. He goes on to describe feminism as rehashed communism and collapses ideological opponents into a single spiritualized enemy by claiming that communism and diabolic psychology are the same, adding bluntly, it's the same thing with the left. Wow. Tell me that you have lost all ability to intellectually, critically engage with a nuanced subject without telling me that you've lost all ability to do that. Holy shit, Batman. When these elements are combined, the result is a closed system, a single political diagnosis. Feminism, a spiritual warfare narrative, Satan's strategy, and a psychology of dissent. They're masters at psychologically getting to you, reinforce one another, and also further divide and scare and create discord between two groups that need to be working together right now more than ever, men and women. We need to be working together. We need to be appreciating each other's skills and abilities, what we bring to the table, and we need to be inviting everybody to that table for these conversations because, sorry to say, some big men with puffed up chests and some crusader tattoos are not going to be what delivers us into the golden age of utopia. It's never been, and it never will be. Within that system, disagreement cannot simply be disagreement. It becomes evidence of a disorder. Ripperger warns that critics are trying to convince believers that there's something psychologically wrong with you, then insists that their own positions demonstrate a lack of rational stability. And in his parish talk in Charlotte back in March of this year, Ripperger bluntly laid out the implications of the curse of Eve on women. When Adam and Eve fell, the punishment after the fall fit the crime that they committed. So what does this mean in the context of the woman when she ate the apple outside the proper dominion of her husband? It meant, therefore, that the punishment fit the crime. That meant that women after that, and Eve and all women after that, will strive to try and dominate their husband, and this is something that they have to work on. This kind of rhetoric is meant to condition people. It trains women to distrust their own perceptions, moral instincts, and experiences of harm before the conversation even begins. When a wife's resistance is pre-interpreted as spiritual defect, psychological instability, or demonic influence, the space for genuine discernment collapses. In such a framework, coercion can easily be called order, control masquerades as headship, and suffering silently through spousal abuse can be reframed as obedience. This is precisely why this theology is not merely wrong, but dangerous, because it supplies the conceptual architecture that can normalize, excuse, or even sanctify spousal abuse long before anyone ever uses that word. And not only can it allow spousal abuse to thrive, but it can also prevent people from accessing life-saving, life-changing care that they need. Because what happens if a woman is married to a man who doesn't believe in mental health care, doesn't believe like it's a fictitious thing that you have to have faith in, doesn't believe in depression, doesn't believe in anxiety, doesn't believe in something like postpartum depression, something that affects an astronomical number of mothers. Any symptoms that woman is having, could be having, will be treated as like something that she just needs to get under control, or at the worst could be perceived as some type of like demonic influence, because that is eventually where all of this leads. It's all about this spiritual battle with this demonic force and how we all have to be engaged in this spiritual battle. And there are all these different little steps and things that you have to follow in order to be sure that you're engaged in the proper way. That's where this all leads. And as sad as it is, there are so many stories about people who needed mental health care, needed to see a psychiatrist, needed to go to therapy. But instead of accessing those things, because their family didn't believe in it, they were instead sent off to have an exorcism that they didn't need. Or they were sent off to some camp to have their ideas converted to something a little bit more palatable. That has gotten people killed. Not once, not twice, not a dozen times. That's where all of this eventually leads. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read this last bit of the article. He talks about the implications. I just talked about the implications. You can go and read his thoughts on the implications. Link the article down below. And I'll be keeping my eyes peeled for part 2. And if I catch it when it comes out, I'll be sure to save it for a Newsroom Analysis. But I figured, new year, time to put a new character on our radar. Father Chad Ripperger has made my list. All right, moving right along. We've got, let's see. I've got a few articles left, but in truth, I've been going for so long. I'm thinking about calling it quits now. I'll skim through the next couple and we'll focus on the one that I think is really important. In past Newsroom Analyses, I've talked about this Hakuna. This is a youth group that emerged from Opus Dei, and it's been making the rounds around Spain and Europe, I guess, as well. It was founded by someone who was a member of Opus Dei, but they are no longer a member of Opus Dei. And it's a big youth outreach thing. See here it says that it's a Catholic pop group that was formed in 2013 as part of the preparations for World Youth Day held in Rio de Janeiro. And the founder, Jose Pedro Manglano, was a priest who at that time belonged to Opus Dei. So on their website, the group explains how they follow a lifestyle which is centered on being kneeled before Christ and the host, describing how they learn to live kneeling before their neighbor, before life, and before the world. They've been making the rounds, giving performances. The organization of this musical group is as unique as the group itself, led by a 7-member service board. In addition, Hakuna has a general assembly of members known as losers, those who adhere to the lifestyle defined by Hakuna. That's interesting. Among these losers are lay people seminarians, and priests who collaborate with the music group. These members truly live up to their name, as they are the most committed to community life and the religious mission of Hakuna. Another level of organization within this group consists of regional coordinators and mentors. We've also found a list of countries where they are established, totaling 25 countries in Europe, America, and Asia. In Spain, they have a strong presence in more than 25 dioceses. It's been gathering speed consistently over the last few years. Their daily activities, the youth group carries out training and volunteer work such as holy hours, revolcaderos, which are small groups that meet every 2 weeks to grow in faith. Sounds like a circle. Sharing and getaways, and Soul College, which are training courses in anthropology and theology. So it's interesting. They're becoming more popular, or at least are gaining momentum, and kind of an interesting thing given its origins and everything, and it's directed at young people, which I always think is interesting, and it'll be interesting just to see what happens, what kind of evolves next. I'm not exactly sure what to make of this group, but again, because of the fact that it is connected, or came up from someone who was affiliated with Opus Dei, I do think it's interesting. And the fact that they're talking about things like weekly talks followed by an hour of adoration, and small groups that meet every 2 weeks, and training courses, it feels very like Opus Dei coded to me, which again, that could just be, Opus Dei didn't come up with this stuff originally, right? There are lots of Catholic organizations that do this kind of thing, or a few of these things, or whatever, and that doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong with them. But, given the context, the fact that the guy who founded it was a member of Opus Dei and was, as a priest and everything, I think it's kind of worth mentioning. I guess that's him. They got a guy drumming, and he has a collar, so I'm assuming that's the founder priest. Anyway, something just to kind of keep on your radar. Here is our fugitive from justice, Marcin Romanowski. The court quashes European arrest warrants against the MP who fled to Hungary. The case of Marcin Romanowski, a member of parliament elected in our constituency, is once again stirring strong emotions. The district court in Warsaw has quashed the European arrest warrant issued last December against the politician who was suspected of participating in an organized crime group and embezzling funds from the Justice Fund. This guy is also affiliated with Opus Dei. Let's see if it mentions that in here. Yeah. The Hungarian authorities' decision caused an uproar in Poland and abroad. Romanowski publicly asserted that he was fighting for Poland, despite previously declaring that he would not go into hiding. Despite his escape, he formally remained a member of parliament and received his salary. It is worth recalling that Romanowski is also a numerary of Opus Dei, an institution of the Catholic Church, which in many countries is credited with significant influence in politics and business circles. So it's kind of been playing out slowly over the last year and change with this guy, with the embezzlement and whatnot, what's going to happen, if they're going to get him to come back, blah, blah, blah. He's been in hiding. It's just kind of an interesting situation. Okay, so this article from Info Vaticana, Spanish bishop promotes the opening of the first Catholic school in Finland. So this is something that I've discussed in the past. This Opus Dei, well, he was an Opus Dei priest. Now he's the Bishop of Finland. I don't know if he's still Opus Dei. One would assume he's still affiliated with Opus Dei. And anyway, he got sent to Finland, which has an incredibly small Catholic population, very scattered, to try to create some infrastructure, basically. And because of his affiliation with Opus Dei, it kind of raised some eyebrows and caught some people's attention pretty early on, because Finland is not a super Catholic country. I think it's predominantly Lutheran, or at the very least Protestant. And it seemed like an interesting, they say 20,000 Catholic in a population of 5.5 million. So it's very small, and it has just a single diocese in Helsinki. But now he's been working hard. He's been raising funds. He's been making the rounds, and now there is a school, the first Catholic school in Finland, that will mark a milestone for the ecclesial life of the country. The educational center is scheduled for August 2026 in the Lauttasaari neighborhood in Helsinki, and is set in the context of a numerically minority but growing Catholic church. And based on who the people I've talked to and what I've kind of learned from being on like Opus Dei Exposed and Opus Libris is that a lot of the reason why it's growing, the Catholic population, is because of immigration. And I and others, especially over on like Opus Dei Exposed, have hypothesized that that influx of immigration could be what Opus Dei is kind of hoping to capitalize on in some small way. I mean, look, they got to do what they got to do. The numbers are failing. People are leaving. People aren't staying. They're getting indicted on, you know, pretty serious charges in places like Argentina. So they got to do what they got to do. And Finland's kind of outside everybody's like purview. It's kind of off to the side. You know, they can send people over there to start working and try to like build up some sort of like nest egg for themselves and not have to worry about people being all up in their business about it. But then again, every single time this guy does something, they write an article about it, so I don't really know how like low key it's going to be. But it says the school will be open to all without distinction of religion or convictions. Religious education will be taught in accordance with current legislation and the student's denomination, or alternatively as civic education. The Catholic identity will be expressed mainly through the educational climate, the transmission of Christian values, community life, and the celebration of the main feasts of the liturgical calendar. This initiative is developing under the episcopate of Monsignor Remo Goyarola Belda, a Spanish priest and member of the Opus Dei Prelature and Catholic Bishop of Helsinki since September 2023. At the head of the country's only diocese, he assumes all pastoral and institutional responsibilities of the Catholic Church in Finland. So despite the fact that the Catholic population is very small, 20,000 people still, that ain't nothing. And if that's growing and he's the only person in charge of it, that could create a pretty advantageous set of circumstances if things are done correctly. Yeah, so it says, in a predominantly Lutheran but deeply secularized society, the opening of the first Catholic school does not alter the country's religious balance. However, it constitutes a sign of the Catholic Church's will to root itself stably in Finland, transmitting its values and participating within the legal framework and the educational and social life of the country. So, we will see what happens. I have my suspicions, obviously. I'm sure that's obvious from the way that I was reading this article. All right, so this is from El Diario. This was published on December 24th by Paula Bestagnino. Victims of Opus Dei are wary of the new statutes to the Pope that the Pope has to approve. That's right, folks. We are still waiting months and months and months and months and months later. We still don't know where Opus Dei's new statutes are or what's going to happen. Quote, the deception continues. The first-hand accounts of women subjected to servitude in Argentina, Latin America, and Europe gathered at a summit in Buenos Aires have reached the inner circle of Pope Leo. A decision on the organization's future is expected after the extraordinary consistory on January 7 and 8. So I did not talk about this event because I'm going to be doing a standalone video that will be out later in the week or so about this summit that everyone attended in Buenos Aires. If you don't know, this was on December 16th. Survivors of Opus Dei and then survivors of just clerical abuse in general, authors, researchers, journalists, they gathered in Buenos Aires to talk about the state of clerical abuse and how there needs to be something done about it, essentially. And we obviously, one of the things that they talk about is the fact that they're still waiting on these statutes. So I'm going to hold off on reading the entirety of this article right now because, like I said, I'm going to do a standalone video about it, about the summit and everything and what people discussed and the fallout from it. But if you want to read this, it is linked down below. more so just wanted to highlight the fact that, yes, we are still waiting. I get people who ask sometimes, and I'm not following the Vatican side of things as closely, but it's impossible not to hear about it if you're following anything happening with Opus Dei, because for better or for worse, it would mean a lot to the victims of Opus Dei for there to be something substantial and meaningful done on the part of Pope Leo or the Vatican to discipline Opus Dei. And that hasn't happened yet. And who knows if it ever will. I mean, who knows if we're ever going to see the new statutes. All right, last article. This is from thecatholicherald.com, so, take it with a grain of salt. This was published December 27th, written by Niwa Limbu. The Guardian's coverage of Opus Dei treats facts as optional. So, not happy. Let's read this. Like many Catholics who are familiar with their faith as it is actually lived, Opus Dei rarely resembles the institution so often presented in the secular press. It does not fit easily into the narratives that are routinely imposed upon Catholic bodies. Instead, the picture painted is frequently one of cult and secrecy, drawn less from Catholic reality than popular fiction. Much of this framing still owes more to the Da Vinci Code than to any serious engagement with the life of the Church. So note very quickly, just in this first paragraph, we started out talking about Opus Dei and very quickly slid from talking about and trying to define Opus Dei to talking about serious engagement with the life of the Church. And by church, they mean the Roman Catholic Church, not the Church of Opus Dei. But of course, Opus Dei will paint itself right into the same corner as the Catholic Church so as not to be able to be criticized without saying, well, you're criticizing the Catholic Church, or, to deflect essentially from it. And I feel like you see that in this paragraph right here, because we start out talking about how Opus Dei is, rarely resembles this institution that people talk about and blah, 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 and the Da Vinci Code. But it's because people aren't seriously engaging with the life of the Church. Well, is it that they're not seriously engaging with the life of the Church, or is it that they don't understand Opus Dei? Because Opus Dei is apparently intentionally opaque and vague. With fiction, the imagination is given free rein and reality becomes distorted. Okay, well, the Da Vinci Code is not the only book that's been written that has anything to say about Opus Dei. In fact, at this point, I would say that the Da Vinci Code is the least of the literature. Of course, over time, this produces a false picture when we have seen repeatedly in media portrayals of Catholicism, which is often treated not as a concrete reality to be examined carefully, but as a symbolic canvas onto which wider anxieties and grievances are projected. That's an interesting way to say that you don't like hearing about people raising valid concerns about the structure of a religious organization. For Opus Dei, this makes it an easy target for the secular press. It is poorly understood, sufficiently obscure to be cast as unsettling, organized enough to appear suspicious, and Catholic enough to provoke instinctive mistrust among readers already primed to expect wrongdoing. That is such a misleading and honestly inaccurate thing to say, and spits in the face of some really hard work by some incredibly talented journalists and survivors of this organization. Let's read this again. It's poorly misunderstood, sufficiently obscure to be cast as unsettling, organized enough to appear suspicious, and Catholic enough to provoke instinctive mistrust. Is it poorly understood because it's obscure, or because it seems to march by this do as we say, not as we do ethos? Is it sufficient? Is it suspicious because it's organized? Or is it suspicious because certain types of people keep popping up in certain types of places who happen to have certain types of affiliations with other certain types of people who all tie back to this organization? I understand correlation doesn't equal causation, but, I talked a minute ago about missing the forest for the trees. I don't intend to insult Niwa Limbu's intelligence here, but I think they're missing the forest for the trees just a little bit. Is it Catholic enough that it provokes instinctive mistrust? Is that the reason why? Or is it because This organization has a history of targeting and grooming children for recruitment into its organization, telling these children to lie about it to their parents, telling these children to keep it a secret, encouraging these children to engage in self-harm, things like wearing a spiked chain around their leg or literally whipping themselves with a whip. Is it because it's Catholic, or is it because in France the organization was convicted of labor trafficking? Is it distrusted because it's Catholic, or because over in Argentina 43 plus people now have spoken out saying that they were treated like slaves in this organization, given absolutely no rights, worked until their bodies and minds broke? It has been my opinion for a while now that this entire situation that Opus Dei now finds itself in, that I am now bearing witness to, by virtue of the fact that I stumbled upon this shit, wouldn't be talking about it if I hadn't literally stumbled upon it when I was minding my own business 5+ years ago, just trying to get through my own religious deconstruction. When I stumbled upon what in my mind amounted to one of the greatest human rights violations and abuses that the Catholic Church has ever seen. Opus Dei has no one to blame for the current state of affairs than itself. They wanted to play games, and they found out. They're finding out. And I don't know how much Niwa Limbu was paid to write this ridiculous puff piece, but to misrepresent and to downplay what real human beings are saying that they suffered is just absolutely insane to me. Of course, it's the Catholic Herald, so why should I expect any different? I mean, for all I know, this is another media outlet that has Opus Dei fingerprints all over it. We know that they're in media. They're all over things like EWTN and Exaudi and Info Vaticana. But the inability to critically engage with what is a real issue. We're talking about, like, crimes against humanity here. We're talking about some of the worst affronts to human dignity that you can possibly imagine. Guys, I'm not being hyperbolic here. I'm not over here just going off to go off. And it's obvious to anyone who has spent longer than the time that it took for Niwa Limbu to slap this article together to realize that none of this holds any water. It's impossible to look at the facts, to read the stories, to read the research, to read the books, to listen to the interviews. It's impossible to do all of those things and come away with the impression that Opus Dei has a bad reputation because it's a little bit secretive and it's Catholic. That's not why. I know it. They know it. And I hope you know it, because Niwa Limbu and the rest of the gang over at thecatholicherald.com think that their readers are gullible and stupid, and that they will believe, like I said, whatever slop they are fed. Anything to remove the little snags and little uncomfortable things that you might get hung up on as you're trying to work your way through this issue. Nothing to see here. Everything's fine. Sure, some bad things may have happened to some people somewhere at some point in time, and that's very sad, but also nothing bad has ever happened to anyone because we pride ourselves on living out the truest and most authentic form of Christian charity. Bullshit. It's bullshit. I know it. They know it. Niwa Limbu might not know it because they might be a true believer. I'm not going to go after this person because I don't know them and I don't know what they believe and I don't know how they feel and I don't even know if this is a real person. Might not be. But this is the message that the Catholic Herald, and who the Catholic Herald represents, wants mainstream Catholics to consume and understand and believe about the current crisis that is facing Opus Dei. Well, it's unpopular just because it's a little secretive and it's Catholic and people don't like that. Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. You sound so incredibly small-minded and ignorant. Also, I'm scrolling through here, and they're nitpicking, it seems, in my opinion. You know, they make a mention in passing. Where was it? I saw the number 43, so I know that they did. Says the Guardian's report of 15 December on an international gathering in Argentina of former members of Opus Dei is revealing less for what it establishes than for what it attempts to suggest. Stripped of its most eye-catching element, the story concerns a conference in Buenos Aires organized around the testimonies of 43 women who allege they were exploited when they were young and who are now engaged in a legal dispute with Opus Dei and its regional leadership. That dispute is already underway, prosecutors are investigating, lawyers are involved, and public debate in Argentina has been ongoing for some time. Again, seems like a massive minimization of the actual scope of the issue, but okay. But then they go on to say that apparently there's some line about Pope Leo privately urging organizers to convene the conference, which it is true that Pope Leo has spoken very supportively of journalists and people who are attempting to defend human rights. This is true. Whether or not that amounts to privately urging them, who knows? But, you know, that seems to be the number one gripe that Niwa Limbu and the people at the Catholic Herald are taking issue with. That they don't know whether Pope Leo knew about the conference at all. That's what they want to argue about. Not the human rights violations that people are trying to discuss, not the strides that people are trying to make in the realm of protecting people against clerical abuse, or simply educating people on the reality of what clerical abuse is, what it looks like, how it manifests, what to do about it. It's not about any of those things. It's about whether or not Pope Leo knew about this conference. And I think that right there tells me everything that I need to know. There are always going to be two groups of people. There's going to be the people who can handle reality and contend with what is in front of them, and there are going to be the people who are not. They just can't. For whatever reason, they cannot, will not, won't. And in that same vein, there are two types of people. People who are a part of the solution and people who are a part of the problem. You get one choice, and you must choose, or you will default to being a part of the problem. You don't get to sit the fence. But anything to comfort the rattled minds of those who have bought and believed the lie that Opus Dei is in some way, shape, or form synonymous with the Catholic Church, and that people don't like it simply because it's been a little secretive and it's Catholic. So I think that's a pretty good article to conclude on. I don't really have anything else to say about it, but I wanted to bring it to your attention and highlight one of the ways that, yet again, this whole situation with the 43 women, and then, you know, it's not just these 43. Sometimes you read articles like this, and they would have you believe that it's just these 43 random people and their lawyers who are drumming up all this humdrum drama. But that's not true. That is such a gross oversimplification. And like I said, it spits in the face of some incredible work that has been done by survivors, human rights advocates, and journalists. And I'm not talking about myself here, by the way, in saying that. I'm talking about real human rights advocates, real journalists, the people who are doing the really hard work, boots on the ground. It spits in the face of years, decades of work, and I couldn't let that be without saying something about it, because I just think it's incredibly fucked. And I hope that you can see the problems with it too. So anyway, that brings us to the end of the newsroom analysis. That's everything that I had. Like I said, I do have some standalone topics that I'm going to be releasing kind of in a similar format as this. I've gathered up some articles that I found about the summit in Buenos Aires that I'm going to be reading through, putting together into a video format for you guys so you can hear about how that went. And then there are some other situations that I want to discuss as well, and so that will be coming out in the not too distant future too. So thank you so much for staying with me through this. This was a long one, but I feel like everything that we talked about was pretty important and pretty significant, and I just appreciate your attention to the subject matter for while we are here. So with all that said, this is where I'm going to leave you for now. Thank you for being here. Please do like and share if you have not already. Let me know your thoughts down below. And yeah, socials, everything linked down below as always. I've got some resources if you or someone you know is struggling with mental health and you need some support. I've got some resources. Take a look. There might be something there that can help you or help whoever it is that you're trying to help. I think that's pretty much it. I'll see you for another video very soon. And remember, nolite te bastardes carborundorum. Do not let the bastards drag you down.